Good evening, everybody, and good afternoon and good morning for those who are joining from different parts of the world. Welcome to the second meetup of the Sri Lankan Power BI community. We are having some issues with the main speaker joining us. So while she joins, let's do a little switch and let's have MADUSHAN go first, and then afterwards, once Jen joins us, we can go ahead and have Jen talking to us. Okay, so to get things started off with, this is what the agenda looks like today. We have Jen STIRRUP speaking on style and substance. So once she joins us, we will let us speak. Until then, we'll have MADUSHAN, who will be talking about measures in slices, how to create, how to have dynamic filters in Power BI. So without further ado, let's move on to MADUSHAN. MADUSHAN is a business intelligence consultant at Fortude. He has a few years experience in working with Power BI, and he specializes in data visualization and Azure data engineering, stuff like that. So MADUSHAN, if you would share your screen, I can switch over to you.
Yeah, sure. Give me 1 second.
Sure, MADUSHAN.
Google, can you see my screen?
Yes, MADUSHAN, and you are now live.
All right. Okay. So hi everyone. Like Google introduced me, I'm MADUSHAN DAHANAYAKE, and I have been working as a BI consultant at Fortude for about 3 years now. That's when I got introduced to Power BI, and ever since then I've gotten hooked. And so what I have to share with you today is by no means a novel concept. That's something that I came up with personally. It's something that has been documented and blogged upon, on the internet. But I think it's not used as much as it should be, and not enough people know about the functionality that you can get out of using this technique. So what I'll show you is that it's usable in multiple use cases. It will do a number of things to your report development process. Basically, it will streamline it. It will help you make modifications in the future, go a lot more smoothly. And in terms of report usability and readability, it will declutter your reports, and it will make it much easier to organize things on a report, because you'll have multiple pages, so you can cut down on report development time and so on. So without any further ado, I'll get into the demo itself. Right. Okay. So I have a report here that I've already built, and I will walk you through the use case. So scenario is a simple sales report. And what the client wants to see, what the initial requirement of the client is that, okay, so he wants to see his sales, and he wants it to be compared against targets. Okay, so I have set up a report. I have my sales measures, I have my target measures, I have the other information, and this is the layout that he's fine with. He's okay with this. So we have a revenue and target by month visual, which is comparing against each month. We have another gauge visual here, and then again against the targets for the countries, if they have hit the targets for the country, for each particular country, and so on. And for the product here as well. Okay, so now this is right now he's fine with it. But say in a couple of months, he's going to come back to me and say, you know what, I don't just want to compare against targets. I want to compare against my previous year sales, right? Okay. So he's fine with the same format. He says, okay, I'm okay with the same format as it is. All I want is, one of the bars to change to my previous sales. It's basically sales versus previous year sales. Okay. So when you hear this first, you know that there's multiple ways to get this done, right? So I walk you through like maybe your thought process of getting this done normally. Okay, so initially what you would try to think is, okay, so depending on how many things we have to fit in here, it might be possible for us to put that previous year comparison or analysis into the same page as well. So I have built a page already that is basically trying to show you how that works, right? So all I have the same analysis still exists. You have your revenue and your target, but now you also have something called your past year sales. Now this is a measure I have built already. It's just all it's doing is just giving me the sales for the same period last year. And then he wants the same analysis. So I have to do 2 gauges and then I have to do 2 KPI cards. Here it's fine. I can have multiple bars. And then in the table here also I need to have multiple columns now. Now, okay, so it started to get a little cluttered, right? We already have 3 bars for each of the months, 3 bars for each of the countries. And if you drill down and go into, say the city level, it's going to get even more cluttered. And it's really hard for someone to read and do a proper comparison on, on any of it actually, because the bars are too thin and it's really hard. So this basically, reduces your readability of the report. So I take this to my client and he says, you know what, no, this doesn't work for me. It's too cluttered. There's too many things going on. What I want is just to switch between sales versus targets at one point and then sales versus past year at one point. I mean, is that so much to ask? Okay, then I say, you know what, all right, let me come at this from another angle. I can have this in 2 different sheets, right? I have my sales versus target sheet already made, and that's fine. And I duplicate this page basically, and I just change some of the measures around and I create another page, right? Sales versus previous year. Now I have the 2 different pages set up alongside each other, and then I demo it to this customer. And you know what? He's not bad. He's pretty okay with it. But he says, you know what? The user might not know that this analysis is available. Sometimes they always just spend their time on the first page, and if it's not shown to them that it's available, then they're not gonna go and click it and find out that the past analysis is also available. All right, so what do I do then? What I can do is I can add a bookmark, right? So I add a bookmark. I create a bookmark for the past year sales page, and I create a bookmark for the target comparison page, and then I go from there. So I have that set up here as well, right? So I have my bookmark set up. I go into view. There's already multiple bookmarks here, but you have your versus target and versus past year targets in here as well. So I do that, and then I click on, and I have to set up the bookmarks on each page. And then when I click on, right now we are on target. If I click on past year, it will take me to the past year sales. And if I click on target here, it will take me back to the target page. All right, so as long as your network connectivity or the user's network connectivity is pretty good, because you are switching between pages, it looks like it's a toggle, but it's not really, right? It's not a switch, it's not a slicer. Okay, so this is one way you could do it. This is another way you could do it. But along with this comes a little bit of complexity in report development, right? Now, I'll walk you through a couple of scenarios. Now imagine he's fine with these 2 metrics for now. What about if he wants to have another metric in the future, say projections? He wants to compare his sales versus projections. And what will you have to do then? Obviously, you will have to have your projection measures, all that. Imagine that's already in your model. If that's already in your model, from a report development point of view, what will you have to continue along the path that you have actually set up, right? You will have to have another page in here. It will be sales versus projections, and then you would have to set up your bookmarks again. Go and modify the old pages, because you remember now you need to have 3 bookmarks, right, in each page, and then you would have to maybe shuffle these. Now I've set it up for 2 things. I might have to maybe move some of these visuals around to get another one in here, and so on. So it becomes there's a bit of a process there, and it will increase your development time. So what I will be sharing with you today is a little technique that you can use to a technique that's flexible, that you can use to basically cater to new requirements as they come in, and also just from a readability point of view, give the same this toggle sort of switching behavior, but within the same page without having to mess around with bookmarks. Because from my experience, what I know about bookmarks is even though it's a very good feature, adding bookmarks to a report and managing them and creating them and managing them is a bit of a process that you have to really be careful with, because even a simple thing, if let's say a visual is like missed out in a bookmark, for example, it can be a problem. And sometimes people expect the filters to populate to the bookmark as well. If the month is selected, they want to be able to go have that same selection in the month as well. So there are a little bit of things that you have to think about if you go in the bookmark route. So what I want to do is I want to just show you right now. I will use this model as an example. So it's a very simple model. I have my just go into the sales model view. It's a very simple model. I have my sales table. I have my product, my manufacturer. So these are my dimensions. I just have basically the 4 dimensions: my calendar, my date, geography, product, and the manufacturer of that certain product. And then I have my sales, and then my targets are basically 110% of my past year sales and so on. So I'm not getting into that, but what I just want to show you is, okay, so the first step, what I would want to do is, I said measures in slicers, right? So whenever you think about a slicer, you know that measures really cannot be used as a slicer. Power BI won't allow you to do that, right? You need to have a column or a field in your data model that can be used as a slicer. So the first thing then is to create that field. Now to populate this table, you could use it from you could bring it in from your source system itself, or Excel file, or wherever you have it. So then you don't have to manually come into the model and edit it. But for this example, I'm just going to show you, because I only have the 2 records in here. What I'm going to have is I'm going to create a table. I'm going to go to enter data, create a table, and I'm just going to write in past year, and I'm going to say target, and I will name this comparison, and we call this comparison metric. Okay, so I load that table, and it's not going to take a lot of time. Okay, so one thing to notice, this table, what's really good about this technique is that it doesn't have to be connected to anything in your model. It's just separate. It's there, but it doesn't have to connect to anything. So you could implement this technique in any of your existing data models. It doesn't have to start from scratch. Even a very complicated model with a lot of relationships, a lot of tables going on, you don't have to worry about reconfiguring or setting up relationships, because it exists entirely out away from all of those things. So we have that table set up, and what it looks like is this, just the two rows, that's it. And what I'm going to do now is, okay, so logically, if you think about it, what we want to do is, when the user selects target, right, we want the target value to be shown. And then when the user selects past year, we want the past year measures to be shown. That's basically the logical steps that we have to do, right? So we can use DAX to get that done. I'm going to go into my sales measure collection here, and then I have sales measure already built, right? So what I'm going to do is, this is what I want to change. Basically, I want to change. I want to change my target measure and change it to past year. So I'm going to leave my target and my past year sales alone. I'm going to create a new measure. Excuse me, just before that, what we want to do is, I said when the user clicks on a certain thing, we want to be able to populate it accordingly, right? Okay, so how do we capture what the user clicks? That's the first step. The first step is that. So we can create the measure wherever you want. It's going to be hidden anyway, but I'll create it in here. It's because it's easy for me to manage it. So in the under comparison metrics, I'm going to create a measure that returns to me the value that the user has selected. Now there are multiple ways to do this. You could write a min or a max, and it will still give you what you want to do. But what I like to use is this the function selected value. And what I'm going to just do is I'm going to say comparison metric, and this is the field comparison. All right, that's it. That's all I have to do. So this measure will return to me whatever the user has selected, right? So let's get rid of. Let's actually duplicate this page. Duplicated this page. We don't want these targets here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the slicer in here and do a comparison. Okay. A little smaller. All right, it'll do for now. Okay, so past year is selected, target is selected. Nothing really happened so far, right? But we have created the measure. So what I can do is I can show you what that measure does. Just drag it here, selected comparison. That's what it does. Basically, when target is selected, it will return target. And when past year is selected, it will return past year, right? Okay. Now I have that selected, the value selection, whatever the user makes already made. Now what I want to do is I'm going to create another measure. And this will be the measure that changes depending on what the user selects. So I will call this for now comparison, right? You could also call it target or past year sales. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this switch syntax that I really like using. It's basically if you Google it, Google switch true, you'll get this, any article, multiple articles about why this is like really easy to use. You could use a switch statement, yes, but this allows me to use it as is basically replacing an if-else statement, a nested if-else statement. I'll show you the syntax of it. Basically, I just put switch true, and then all I have to do is I have to write the expression. So my expression is this. My first expression is basically, imagine it's an if condition. So I say if selected comparison equals, I say it's do a target. Then what I have to do is, then after the comma, what you have to say is what do you want returned. Okay, so I want the target measure that I have already made returned. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to do line break. It's easy to read. And then I will say, okay, so my next one is if the selected comparison equals past year, then give me past year sales. That's it. Then I can also do an else statement without having an expression written in here. I can just do an else statement. Basically, the else is, if it's not neither of these conditions, what should I do? Now you can have a default value set in here. You can say, okay, if the user has not selected it properly, or if they have selected, both of these things, or they have not selected either of the values, then you can say by default it will show last year's sales. What I like to do is I like to return blank so that the user knows that they have done something wrong and that they're not going to be confused as to what is shown in the report. Okay, so I made that. And something to note in this technique is that you have to make sure that both the metrics that you're including in this have the same type of formatting. So right now it's not a problem for me because my target and my past year sales are both captured in currency and with decimal points, with no decimal points. If you want to switch that around, for example, if you want to have some sort of a percentage value in here as well as a currency value in here, then you're going to have a problem formatting that, because ultimately whatever value that you put in here is going to be formatted as one thing, because this is a wrapping, this is a wrapper function, basically. This is a wrapper measure, right? So it's fine for me. It works for me. Currency is fine with that. I'm fine. And then what I have to do is now let's do a quick check to see if it works. Okay, so I'm just going to drag my comparison. And it seems like, okay, that's my past year sales. We are in 2019, so this is my 2018 sales. I click on target, let's see if it changes. All right, seems to be that it's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly change my visuals yeah, what you want to do is you want to change your visuals to this measure. So I just run through one example. I have my comparison and I have my target here. So I'm going to get rid of this target and I am going to put comparison here. Now when the user clicks on past year, it will be showing you your revenue versus past year. And then in which click on target, if you click on target, and then I'll show you that you can set up all the visuals in that way, and even the conditional formatting and all that will work because it's, again, just the one measure. All right, so let me get into that report that I've already built. Okay, so I've already built this report exactly how I want it to be. I just call it sales comparison now because at any point it could be target versus past year. You can also write a dynamic title the same way we did the selected measure. You can do a dynamic title and basically concatenate that selected comparison value into that as well. So then it will be sales versus past year, sales versus target based on the report selection. So I won't get into that as of now, but I'll just show you how this works. So if it's past year selected now, I'll just click on target. Everything will change. Even my conditional formatting is set where my targets have a different condition, so that will populate, and then my conditional formatting in the table will also work. So all of these look fine. Quickly, I think I'm coming up against my 20 minutes. So things to note in mind is, one thing is the formatting. You want to make sure that your formatting is the same as whatever you're comparing against. Other than that, I'll just quickly run through some of the scenarios that we have successfully used this in. So obviously you can use this in sales versus past year, last year versus target comparisons, projection versus actual comparisons, and also I'll show you another example I've set up. This is also a really popular one. If they want to do some sort of time frame switching, sometimes they want to look at the values broken down monthly, let's say MTD values, and then sometimes they want to look at year-to-date values. And you can set up that also in that way. So now everything is set up year-to-date. So if you have some sort of year-to-date target, even any lines you have going on across, you can still make it so that everything will react to whatever selection you have made. And another popular example or another popular use case is currency switching. Right? You have your actual values reported in one currency, and then the users want to see it in another currency, and you have exchange rates. So you can write a measure for the two different things, and then using the same technique, switch between the different things. You don't have to create multiple pages. You don't have to create bookmarks. All you need to do is create one isolated table, one measure to get what you have, what the user has selected. Right now, this is not even required. You can actually embed this into the base measure itself, but just to make it easier to read, right, I have put this here. So one measure to get what the user has selected, and then another measure to actually do the switching between your measures. So that's what I have to share with you today. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, Gomula. If let me know if there's time for questions. If not, that's it from me. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Madushan. There aren't any questions as of now. So Jen is in. We'll switch over to her right now. Anybody, if you have any questions, please use the Ask a Question option there on the live event Q&A, and then we will respond to your questions when the time comes. And thanks so much, Madushan.
Sure, no worries.
Hi, Jen, how are you? You're mute, Jen, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry about all the trouble I had getting in.
Oh, no worries at all, Jen. If you could just share your screen, I'll just put it up on.
Okay, so I hope that everyone can hear me. I just want to dig out some advice. So thank you for those wonderful tips, Madushan. That was really useful. Thank you so much. This session is not a very technical one. It's more of a design session. And the reason for that is sometimes we have to understand better how to do a bad data visualization so we can do it better, really. So what I want to do first is show you some examples of some terrible visualizations. And then when you can recognize better what bad looks like, it will help you to recognize better what good looks like. So I'm just going to share my presentation. So sorry, I'll put it over here. Right. So I'll show you what a bad data visualization looks like. Now, often when we look at data visualization, we think about making things nice colors, how do we visualize the data? But sometimes what we do see is that we start to understand better, it's very easy to get it wrong. So in this session, I'd like to show you how you do a style guide, how to create one for your organization, and the sort of thing that you should consider when looking at the design of a dashboard. I will also show you how we can implement that design using Power BI. So at first glance, this visualization may look okay. However, it becomes really difficult to read. When we look at pie charts, very often we only need one or only should really have 3, 4 or 5 slices. But this pie chart has got a lot of slices. And then it becomes harder for people's eyes to move back and forth between the various slices. So we've got turquoise here, but which turquoise does it refer to? It's quite difficult to read. So straight away we understand that maybe this visualization is not a good example. The colours are not good, the pie chart itself is not appropriate, and it's losing the meaning of the message. So sometimes we need to be sure whether our data visualizations are wrong. So we have yes and no in this example. It's a pie chart again, and what we see is that yes is 50%, no is 49%. The question itself is simply, are A levels becoming harder to pass? 50% said yes, 49% said no. So what we understand from this straight away is that it doesn't add up to 100%. So that means that the data visualization for a start is inaccurate. Also, when we look at the yes example, we can see that it accounts for 1/3 of the pie chart and not half. So not only is the number inaccurate, but so is the data visualization itself. 3D charts are often very difficult for people to read. So we can see from this example here that it's very hard to correctly distinguish what the number is trying to say. And we also see that sometimes having a legend is very useful. It's very hard to understand what this particular chart means. There's no legend, there's no y-axis, so it's really hard to identify what this chart is showing. So it's not very useful and it's difficult to distinguish. Sometimes you're better off not using a data visualization at all. So this one is 100% not sure. So that's difficult to determine as well. And sometimes it's really hard to read. Humans are not good at looking at area or angle. So when we look at this one, we can also see it also doesn't add up to 100%. So when we visualize data, it's actually really important to identify if the data is correct. It's not only got to just look good, it's got to be accurate as well. We are not good at telling area in angles, and that's why pie charts and donut charts do not work very well. So in this example, we are not good at telling the area. We're much better at identifying the length of a line and the height of a line. We're not good at identifying area or angle. So this one is also quite difficult to read. It may look nice because of the colours, but again, it's quite hard to read. The negatives are not really helping, and it also doesn't add up to 100%. This one, I put this in because I'm always frightened of the dentist. 75% of US adults suffer from dental anxiety. But we see here that it represents 50% and not 75%. This one is hard to read, not for the reasons you might think. When you look at the x-axis, you can see it starts at 1960, 1970, 1980, and that pattern continues until 1993, 1997, 1998, and then we start to see data for every single year. The x-axis is very misleading. We don't have any information for the intermittent years, and that makes it very difficult to understand the data at any one point. So we can't mislead people using the axes. So when we visualize this data, it can start to look more like this. However, it still masks the fact that some of the data is actually missing. And again, 3D is not very easy to read. We need to think about different ways to visualize this data. Pyramids are even worse. We don't know if it's the height of the pyramid or the width that's making the statement about the data. So we have quite a few of these. So why is it so important to understand data and visualize it properly? Because if we don't do it, sometimes it can lead to tragedy. This is the Challenger rocket, which was exploded in 1986 in January of that year. This photograph was taken a few seconds before the rocket exploded, killing all astronauts on board. It was really tragic, and I remember growing up watching this, and they actually stopped all of the programs on the BBC to make the announcement that the Challenger had imploded. It was a huge event at the time. Now, one reason that the Challenger imploded was because the O-rings on the side of the rocket were not very sustainable in cold weather. They tended to freeze, and when they froze, they would crack. The morning that the rocket went up was one of the coldest recorded ever in Florida for years. And in the morning of the Challenger, they noted that the engineers were out defrosting the rocket before it went up into the sky. And many of the engineers were trying to explain to the decision makers that the O-ring temperature would be more likely to cause damage and lower temperatures. So what this chart is supposed to show is that the lower the temperature, the more likely it is that the O-rings will sustain damage and damage the rocket. This is not very clear. This looks like a box of crayons. It doesn't actually tell us anything. So when we visualize the data, we can see the relationship of the same data much clearer in this chart. What it's saying is that the lower the temperature, the higher the likelihood is that there will be damage to the O-rings on the Challenger rocket. The warmer it is, then the less likely you will see damage. So when we understand better how important it is for people to understand their data, We need to try and find principles that allow us to have consistency when we start to look at data visualization. You may think, well, why bother visualizing data at all? Why not give everyone tables? Now, here's the rate of hyperinflation for Zimbabwe, and it's in a table, and it starts off in the year 1980 at 7%. In the year 2008, the rate of hyperinflation went from 7% in 1980 to 231,150,888% in the year 2008. We don't get a sense of that when we look at the data. What we do get is a table, and it's quite difficult to see the steep curve until we visualize it. So this chart looks better. It helps us to understand what a spike occurred in the hyperinflation. And if we did not have that, we would not be able to see that quite as well. We really do think with our eyes. We can translate this into a picture. At the height of the hyperinflation, 3 eggs cost $100 billion, which was also the same price for 2 apples. So there's real tragedy behind the data, and sometimes visualizing the data can help us to understand better the issues and how we can help other people. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to close that. Now, I wanted to walk you through a customer example that I've been working on about how to generate a style guide. Very often we think about style guides in terms of color palettes, and many different people actually have examples of style guides. I'll give you a few examples in data visualization style guide. Here's a great example that you might find useful. You can follow some of the guidelines here when you're thinking about creating your own style guide. So there are plenty of examples on the internet, but I wanted to walk you through a customer one that I've been working on. So one thing to think about, actually I will start up Zoom it. Okay. Okay. So sometimes it's a good idea to create a data visualization checklist. And the data visualization checklist contains a number of items, and you can check them off to make sure that they are there. For example, does each chart have a title, an axis label, a horizontal label, and are the lines labelled properly? These things sound really simple. However, what I will say is it's actually really hard. Sometimes to understand visualizations when you don't have an axis on there. And some of the examples that I showed you can actually really help to make it look better. So we need to think about the context as well. So what I did do was give some examples. For example, using a line chart is better if you're visualizing data over time, and you can also do things like increase the line size in Power BI and in other technologies such as Tableau. You can also add in data markers as well in order to focus the eyes on a particular point. Power BI can also help you to add in reference lines, and it can also help you to do some forecasting as well. A very important point is that the actual and the forecasted data should be in different colours. Okay, so a few points to think about. Not all data are equal. Okay, so if the data is not necessary, then don't include it. And if data is not adding anything, then you can remove it. We're trying to make it as simple as possible so that people can understand it. We can also use colour to highlight salient points as well. So I'm just going to start up Power BI and we can have a look at some of those things in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ingest a CSV file and I'm going to move this over here. And we're going to use the world's data bank. I'll use that. So this data is the life expectancy data from the world's data bank. So you can see straight away that there's some issues with the data. For example, the first few lines are full of junk. We don't need those. And we've also got data along here. So before I load the data, I want to transform it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the rows that I don't need. So first of all, we can see that we have got the ability here to remove rows. You can see that here. So I'm just going to remove the first few rows. I'll remove the first 3. And then I'm going to use the first rows as the headers. Okay. So this tells us the country name, the country code, the indicator name, which I'll remove, and the indicator code. We don't need that either, so I'll just get rid of that. So we can see now that the data for life expectancy is in years. So the life expectancy in 1960 for someone from Aruba was 90. So that's great, it's really healthy, isn't it? So let's, what we can do is pivot that data. So we have a much simpler data set. We're going to have a country, we'll have a name, and we'll have a value as well. So to do that, I'm going to transform the data, and then I'm going to use the option to unpivot the columns. So you can find that in the transform header, and you can use unpivot columns here. So when I do that, I've got the country name, I've got the country code, we'll just keep that in. I've got the attribute, which I will rename, so it's year. And I've got the value here, and we're going to call that life expectancy. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm going to commit that change to Power BI, and you can see it there. So now we're applying the changes. And the data now appears as we see here in the screen. So I've got the fields names over here. So I've got the country code and the country name, the life expectancy, and we also have the year. Okay, so the year itself will need to be transformed into an integer. It's just in a string format at the moment. So I'm going to click on year, and then I'm going to change it so it doesn't get summarized, and the data type will be a whole number. Now we can see that the visualization is most likely to be summarized. We don't want to add years, that's not going to add anything to our visualization. So I'm just going to change that to do not summarize. And then I'm going to go back to the reporting canvas that you can see here. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is add on the year. and that appears in the axis. And I'm going to add in life expectancy. So when I do that, you can see Power BI has given me a few things. It's given me a column chart, and the life expectancy has also been aggregated. We don't want to add an average, so what we need to do is take the average. So on the right hand side here, under values, we'll add in life expectancy. And I'm going to make that an average, and then it starts to appear more smooth. Now with this data visualization, when it's a line chart, when it's a column chart like that, we have a lot of ink on the page, and it doesn't look very good. We want to keep things as simple as possible. We call this a data ink ratio, where we're trying to show the maximum amount of data with the minimal amount of ink. So to do that, we can change that to a line chart. Okay, so when we start to look at our data visualization guide, we can start to add in some suggestions on the different ways in which we can start to help people to make the right decisions. So this is a great example. This is taken from Andrew Abella, and I can send round the reference for that. Andrew Abella's chat chooser. I can put that in the chat box. Andrew Abella chat chooser. I just want to be sure that I give credit to the gentleman who's created this. It's an awesome way for you to see the data. So we can look up Andrew Abella, and you can find his chat suggestions in here. You can download this as a PDF as well. So when we start to look at the style palette, the way that we could make guidelines is to say to people, look, you need to consider other people, but try and stay consistent as possible. So when we're visualizing data in a line format, then we need to try and make sure when we're visualizing data, everyone does the same thing for a timeline, and that means using a line chart. So what about colour? Well, what we can do is we can use the default colours, but we can start to implement our own colours using Power BI so that we all have a good standard in how the data appears. So let's have a look. So what we could do to add in some extra colour is to add in the country name. And that appears in the legend that you can see here. It's very difficult to read because there's so many colours now, but something stands out at us. What we see here is that the life expectancy in 1997 for Cambodia was the age of 18, nearly 19. The reason for that was the tragedies happening in Cambodia at that time, and it really shows in the data. You get a real sense of that pattern popping out at you. And it's not just Cambodia as well. We can actually filter so that we just see some charts but not others. So we can select all, and then I can type in Rwanda. I can add Rwanda in here, and we can see Rwanda has got the same thing happening as well. The life expectancy was very low in 1993 after the 100-day war happening there. So these are real tragedies behind the data, and we're trying to make everything as clear as possible so people can see that. Now, when we start to look at the colours, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, but what we can do is start to use themes. So I will just show you how we can do that. We've got the view functionality, and once we've got a number of themes that you can use in Power BI. And you can also browse for themes as well. So I have got some themes in here, which I'm going to use. I'm just going to find who they are. Sorry, I had this ready, but everything seems to They've disappeared. Okay. So we could use a number of themes here. This is the sunflower theme. Now I don't like this because it's given me all of the data themes, but you could add in different themes here. So I'm just going to take off, we've got the values here, and I'm going to keep on the filters, and I'm going to take off the data labels. So the sunflower theme is actually one that you can get from the Power BI site. And it's basically a JSON file. And in the JSON file, you can see at the very top, you can start to use different colours, and those colours could match your corporate palette. So you can do things using the JSON file that would help you to change the background colour. You could change the foreground colour. You could change how the table appears. You could also do things like change the font size. The font size in Power BI is always a bit small for me, but I could start to change things like the category labels to being font size 12, for example. So we could try and change this one. So the way that I work with colours generally is when we look at a style guide, which is here, I start off trying to make recommendations and being quite prescriptive on the sort of charts that people should use. And I also add in some don'ts, okay? So don't use 3D, don't use 2D or 3D pie charts, don't use big grid lines, and you can add in all sorts of things. But I think it's important to have a think about the colours. So there are 3 different types of palettes you can use. One is a sequential palette. Sequential palettes are very good for representing values such as age or priority. So when we look at our visualization for Power BI, we've got different colours available to us. But if we wanted, rather than using categorical colours, we could start to think about changing the data colours. And then we could start to think about using different colours for different purposes. So with data colours, I can remove and choose out different colours. So for Afghanistan, just as an example, I could use bright red for them. And then I could filter so we could see it better. And once you use data colours like that, you can add in labels specifically for that one. You could add in a secondary axis as well if you find that makes it easier. But what you can do is reapply different themes in order to get those to work. So sunflower is yellow, brown, these kind of colours. So let's look at doing a different one. We can browse for another theme. So this one is called waveform. And you can see that it does things like change the top colour of the table grid. And you can see the colours change here. The screen is still quite busy, and it might look better if we start to filter it again. But the other thing we could do is think about people that are colour blind. So I'm going to give you some tips on that as well. So I'm going to go to the themes, and there is a colourblind theme available that you can get from the Microsoft website. And I can give you the link for that one. So when we apply the colourblind template, you'll notice there's no red or green in here, and that's a good thing. I'm going to go back to the style guide. I'll show you how that works. Style guide. So with a sequential palette, you can set up the colours so that it goes from light to dark. Those are diverging colours. I'll go back into Power BI and I can show you that. So I'm going to remove country name. That takes us back into just using one colour here. So what we could do is use, in the format button, use data colours. and then we can do show all colours if we like. That will be for different years. Or we could revert to the default just there. So with this one, we don't get conditional colour formatting. But if we did, we could use conditional colours in order to display more like a sequential palette. But let's keep going and we will have a look. So another palette to think about is if you look at Colour Brewer. Now, Colour Brewer talks about sequential palettes, diverging and qualitative. So when we look at Power BI and we add in the data colours by adding in country names, these are all qualitative. And what that means is you have a different colour for every country. And that makes sense that that happens. We also can have a diverging palette. So what with the diverging palette, that is something like going from one colour through to another colour. And Power BI will let you do that when you look at conditional data. So that's one thing that you can think about. We've also got the sequential palette, which is more of what we saw in the data visualization, where you start with one colour, and the higher the intensity, then the brighter is represented by a different colour. So there's lots of things that you can do in Power BI that will help you to try and standardise things a little bit. So I want to go back to the style guide. So when you're thinking about colours, you must think, well, how can you start? So what I tend to do with my customers is I'll go to, say, their website. This is my website. And then I can use, there's a little tool called Eyedropper. Now, Eyedropper will help me to identify which colours are on a web page. So for me, it's a very good way of identifying the colour scheme that's been used. So when I go back to Eyedropper, extensions, we're going to add that one. When I drag my mouse over the colour, you can start to see that it will come up with the colour and the colour codes that I've got on my own website. So I've got this colour, we can go for RGB, for example, and then I've got the actual colour code here. So what we do get, you can have a history of colours you've seen before, but you've also got something called Generate Palette. That will help you to identify whether you have a sequential, a diverging, or a qualitative palette. So let's look at that. So you can see here we can generate a palette for complementary colours, or I could use colours that contrast. So let's look for complementary colours first of all. So then it's got a green colour. We could also find colours which are harmonious, which go with it. So we've got these colours. Harmonious, we could go for contrasting. Doesn't look very nice to me, but that looks okay. So now I can get rid of these ones. So why don't we have a look at a different palette? So we can go for analogous. Oh, doesn't look good. So we're going to go for contrasting first of all. Okay, so what we could do is pick some of the colours and put those into our JSON file. So to go back to the JSON file, I'm going to save this as a different example. And I'm going to call it save as data relish. Okay, so I could call this corporate palette. And I can start to use the colours. So I'm just going to copy those and then I will load them in. Then we can update those. So now I'm going to save that. I can change the other colours at a later time, but then I could apply that into Power BI. So if you're doing a dashboard for your organisation or for one of your customers, if you're a consultant, what you could do is think about creating and generating a colour palette which will be extremely consistent for everyone to use. So I'm going to call that, I'll save that later, it doesn't matter. Come into the browse for themes, just here. Go into browse for themes again. Oh, here it is, sorry. I have two screens. Okay, I'm going to close it. So this time I'm just going to remove country name. So you can see here that we start to have a pink colour appearing. And that works quite well because it matches what's on the website. So then what you could do is you could find some other colours that go quite well. So you could use that one, for example. The green colour looks okay. I'm going to remove that and switch that one off. Okay. So what I could do is I could just copy the image from the logo and start to put that on. In fact, I'll probably have to insert an image here. So I can pick an image, then we can start to make it look more like a customer palette, something that looks better for customers. I'll just pick an image quite quickly. Events. Oops, it's a bit big. So we can see here is it starts to look more consistent, and then we can add in a title, insert text box. And then when I choose that, you can see it started to come up with the complementary colours, and we've got the theme colours that you can see here. So instead of, I'll just call that black. And you could, in the JSON file, change the size of the font so that it starts to look better. So although I'm using pink, you don't have to use pink. That just happens to be the colour of that website. But you can start to look at the palette and start to think, well, actually, how can I make this look really consistent so that regardless of what the data looks like in the organisation, I can always give it a good, consistent look and feel so that it looks more professional. So I'll just go back to the data visualization guide, which I have just here. Sorry, no, I didn't. So we have to think about accessibility as well, and I want to give you a clue to a fantastic website that will help you to think about being colourblind. So what we have is, it's called Cobliss. Now, people are often surprised by how much it varies when you deal with colour blindness. Now, what we find is that 1 out of every 100 women are colourblind and 12 out of every 100 men. So if you look at this website for colour blindness, that looks normal. It's a bunch of crayons. You know, you see a mix of red and green. But if you start to look at it from the lens of people who have colour blindness, it can look really different, and this surprises me every time I look at it. There are different variations of colour blindness. There's quite a few actually. So this is blue blind, people who can't see the bluer shades better, and that's red blind for people that cannot see red very well. So, and here's just a great example, the same picture viewed through different colourblind lenses. And you can see the difference. Now, on the left-hand side, it's obviously done in Excel. This one is how a normal person, or a person with normal vision, would see that dashboard. But what we see here, on the right-hand side, is how the same chart looks when you actually see it through the lens of someone who's colorblind, and they can look remarkably different. So when you're dealing with Power BI and other technologies such as Tableau, you need to consider how does that look and what are we going to do about it. So I start off by thinking about how can I possibly make sure that this visualization is as clear as possible, and colour is a big part of that. I also value simplicity. So there's some research I can point you at. Cleveland and McGill are the main researchers here who have analysed this from the scientific viewpoint. And I just want to finish by giving you a few references to look at. I can certainly put those in the Teams window, and hopefully that will give you something to think about when you're building your own visualizations out. So with that in mind, I know I had no decks. I just wanted to show you what a real live style guide might look like and how you can implement those using chats, if you like, in Power BI. So if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to take those. I'm just going to look in Q&A and I'll just give you those references so that you have them. I hope you can see them. I should put these in my blog as well, so that you have them. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how complex this subject actually is. It's really interesting. All right, so does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts?
It does not look like there are any questions on the Q&A. So if there's anybody who have any questions for Jen, please type in your questions on the ask a question section in the live event Q&A. And while you're doing that, let's move on to the next bit. Thank you so much, Jen, for speaking for us and sharing your knowledge. Jen is the data whisperer at Data Relish, and she has written numerous books. She is a data visualization expert, and she has done lots of work in the AI and machine learning, business intelligence areas as well. She is also one of the top 20. She was noted as one of the top 20 working wonders in AI, machine learning, data science, and big data. So it's a really it's a pleasure to have you here with us, speaking for us. There seems to be one question from Timantha.
Yes. So hello, Samantha. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I picked up your question. So I think it depends on the purpose. So if I'm doing a visualization for a customer, I believe in trying to give them something they can maintain. So I tend to stick to the Power BI visualizations, and I don't tend to create custom visuals. A few reasons for that. One is maintainability. Often customers don't maintain solutions that you've given them, and I don't want the dashboards to look bad after a length of time because they haven't looked after it. So I believe it makes it a bit simpler for people to look after. I think also sometimes the custom visuals are not always very easy for people to use. I also have a concern about where the data is going if I'm using a third-party visualization. Facebook, for example, were giving data away to third parties and then it ended up all over the place. So I don't want to do that for my customers. So that's why I don't tend to use these things. I think also you can make things really easy for the customer by not having to use the custom visuals. I don't know about you, but I'm very busy all the time and I don't have time to sit and program. I have to just deliver it and then move on to the next thing.
Okay, thank you so much, Jen. So since we don't have any other questions, let's just move to the next section. Okay, so if there is anybody who has more questions or any complex questions, please sign up on our community site and join our group. And then there is an area where you can, there's a discussion area where you can type in your questions and you will have people answering them for you. Moving on to the next section, just another 5 minutes. These are some of the announcements on the Power BI side of things. The Power BI desktop June 2020 version was released a couple of weeks ago. One of the outstanding features from my perspective is the new phone emulator and the new mobile reporting enhancements where you have more space now to build mobile reports or to put together your mobile reports, and also to where you can overlay visuals on top of other visuals. Jen, Madushan, from your side of things, what do you think are something notable in the new in the June edition?
Yeah, hi Google. If I could just, I think one of the things as a report builder, something like, when I look into designing reports and so on, something I've noticed is, coming up with or using shadows in reports always used to be such a hassle earlier, because you had to build it in some sort of a vector tool and then bring it in, and then basically your layout is sort of set in stone and you can't change it. If you add another visual, you have to go back, change the background, and then come back here. But now we have a shadow feature available in Power BI, and I think I've actually used it in the demo as well. So that's something I'm excited to try out and see if you can use some subtle effects to make your dashboards pop. So it might be something very trivial, but something I'm excited to be using.
Okay, thanks, Madushan. Jen, from your side of things, is there anything that stands out in the June 2020 desktop? You are mute, Jen.
Hello there. Not really. I think that there's so many different changes in Power BI over the time. Sometimes it's quite hard to keep up. And if you feel like that too, I sympathise. I find it quite tough to keep up. There's so much happening. I think the main thing is just to practice, and that's how I find out what's happening. I find a new thing, and I'm not afraid to break something, so I'll go and try it, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. And I'm happy just to do that.
All right, thanks, Jen. Okay, so since we don't have any more questions, we can wrap up today. So thank you everybody for joining, especially Jen and Madushan. Thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your knowledge. So if there are any more questions, complex questions, like I said, please feel free to join our group and put up your questions. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time again.
Bye.
Thanks, Google. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.